So in a little over a week, there's a new book by Stephanie Meyer coming out. This book is Midnight Sun, and it's technically the third version of Twilight to be published. We have the original Twilight, which is just the story from Bella's perspective. Then we have Life and Death, which is a gender-bent version of Twilight, and I think it also has a different ending. So instead of the main couple being Bella and Edward, it's a couple called Beau and Edith. But other than that, it's mostly the same. And now we're going to have Midnight Sun, which is Twilight, but from Edward's perspective. There's a long and turbulent history with Midnight Sun. Back in 2008, when Meyer was working on the book, some of the chapters got leaked to the public, and Meyer was pretty upset by that and said that the book had been put on hold indefinitely. Then E.L. James, author of 50 Shades of Grey, which as we all know is just published Twilight fan fiction, comes out with Grey, a version of the first 50 Shades of Grey book, but from Christian Grey's perspective. So it seemed like Midnight Sun would never be published. It would never see the light of day in its fully completed version. But then back in May, Meyer announced that the book would be published in August. Now, there are a lot of problems with the Twilight series. I'm aware of that. Just to mention a few, the depiction of minorities in the books, especially Native Americans, is bad, to say the least. The depiction of the relationship between Bella and Edward, which is extremely toxic and emotionally abusive, is never depicted as anything less than the pinnacle of true love. There's also the whole child grooming, low-key pedophilia thing with Renesmee and Jacob. So the book has a lot of problems, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that. Down in the description, I've put links to both the Quileute Nation's website, as well as an article by the Burke Museum about Twilight and the Quileute people. It's a really interesting article. I suggest you take a look at it. Also, look at the Quileute Nation's website as well. It has a lot of stuff about their history, their culture. Just check them out. They're very informational, they're very interesting, and lifelong learning is a very important thing. So Midnight Sun is Twilight from the perspective of a different character. Like I said, Twilight's from Bella's perspective, Midnight Sun is from Edward's. And retelling stories from the perspective of a different character isn't exactly a new concept. Books like Grendel and Wide Sargasso Sea tell the story of Beowulf and Jane Eyre, respectively, from the perspective of a non-titular character. U2's End of the World is a song about the Last Supper from the perspective of Judas. And retelling stories from the perspective of a different character isn't even something new to the genre of vampire lit. The second half of The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice is pretty much just Interview with the Vampire from Lestat's perspective instead of Louis'. The fact that telling stories from a different perspective isn't something that's brand new and shiny isn't the point of this video. It's just something I wanted to mention, and I didn't think it was enough of a topic to make an entire video about. So I just wanted to mention it here as a little appetizer to the main thesis of this video. This video is about the vampires in Twilight and how terrifying they are. I know, it's a hot take, but only a hot take if you haven't read the books. To be fair, it's been a hot minute since I've read the books. I read them in late elementary, early middle school, and I thought I was so mature and cool for reading teen lit, and I know that I finished at least the first 2 books. I can't recall if I finished the whole series. Fun fact, growing up, my parents would sometimes read the same books I was reading so that I could talk to them about it, but also so that they could make sure I wasn't reading anything that was terribly age inappropriate. So this means that both of my parents have for sure read all the Twilight books, and I can only guarantee that I've read the first 2. Shout out to my parents. Anyways, if you were on the internet back in the late 2000s, early 2010s when the Twilight movies were first coming back, you probably remember the internet culture around the books and movies. How people had such utter devotion and love for the series, or complete and utter hatred. There really wasn't a lot of in between. As I mentioned earlier, Twilight is deserving of some criticism, but a lot of the criticism that the series received at this time wasn't about the things I mentioned earlier. It wasn't about any of the actual problems with the books or the movies even. It was mostly just hatred because it was a vampire romance novel that was enjoyed by teenage girls. One of the main criticisms it got was that, the vampires in it aren't even scary, they just sparkle. Well, that's where you're wrong, early 2000s internet troll. That's where you're wrong, because the vampires in Twilight are terrifying. The vampires in Twilight are scary. I consider myself a vampire connoisseur. I've written multiple papers and done multiple projects on the topic of vampires in various forms of media. My capstone, the crowning achievement of my undergraduate degree, is going to be about vampires. To be fair, it's not due for like another 2 years, and I still have to get department approval and find an advisor. So, it's a lot more in theory than in practice, but it's gonna be about vampires. I know what I'm talking about. So I know about vampires, I know my stuff. And I understand where the idea that Twilight vampires aren't scary comes from. I mean, compare Edward Cullen to Nosferatu. There's a clear winner on the creepiness factor. The Twilight vampires, even the evil ones, are really pretty. And that's on purpose. In Twilight, when a vampire is created, their physical appearance and muscle mass go under a change to allow for peak performance. Whatever level of attractiveness you had in life gets multiplied by like 10. In the books, a lot of the vampires that Bella meets are described as being like godlike in their appearance or breathtakingly beautiful. I'm pretty sure that in the scene where Bella meets Rosalie for the first time, she describes her as being so beautiful she almost cries. Can you imagine that? Being so beautiful that you move someone to tears? Similarly, vampires' voices change to make them sound more alluring. They also give off a pheromone that makes humans attracted to them. And this is on purpose. This is to get their prey closer to them, to trust them, so that it's easier to hunt. And if you're going, Emily, you're crazy, attractive people aren't automatically more trustworthy, well, you're wrong. May I introduce you to the halo effect, which is a cognitive bias that we all have. The halo effect, which is sometimes called the halo error, is the tendency to associate positive traits with people that are more attractive to us, people that look better. We have an innate bias to view those that we view as attractive as being smarter, more capable, kinder, more trustworthy. So if you're a vampire and you want humans to trust you enough that they're willing to get close to you, making it easier to hunt, being attractive is a pretty useful trait to have. It's kind of like the anglerfish. In Twilight, the vampires are described as having skin that's like marble. It's as hard as marble. Have you ever touched a marble statue or a granite countertop, or are you familiar with the concept of rocks? It's like that. If you met someone and like when you shook their hand or touched them, it felt like marble, you'd be pretty put off. You might even be a little confused or frightened. Not only does their skin feel like marble, but it's just as strong, and put a pin in that concept because we'll be coming back to it later. The marble-like skin is why they sparkle in the sunlight. It's because as part of the transformation, their skin cells take on a crystalline form to make their skin so hard and durable. So sunlight, one of the only things in most vampire media that can kill a vampire, doesn't do any harm to the vampires in Twilight. It doesn't hurt them, it doesn't even sting, they just shimmer.
This is the skin of a killer, Bella.
So once you become a vampire in Twilight, your body stops changing. Your nails stop growing, and also your hair stops growing as well. So I hope that you had a haircut that you liked when you were turned into a vampire, because you're stuck with it for all eternity. And obviously as a vampire, you no longer age. In Twilight, you don't only stop aging physically, but you also stop aging mentally. Put another pin in that last concept because we'll be coming back to it. Vampires don't have any blood in them. That's why they're so pale. It's because there isn't any blood circulating through the body. In the Twilight universe, all that blood has been replaced with venom. All bodily fluids have been replaced with venom. It's not saliva in Edward Cullen's mouth, it's venom. Same with the eyes. The point of tears is to flush out foreign objects from the eyes, and the point of like the liquid in your eyes is to allow them to move and rotate within the sockets. Vampires don't have any bodily fluids besides venom, so it's venom that's lubricating the eye sockets, allowing the eyes to move. Part of this means that vampires don't need to blink. Also, because there's no blood in their system, their hearts stop beating. They also don't need to breathe, and they don't sleep. They are, in every sense, the living dead. The eye color of the vampires also changes to reflect their feeding habits. All newborns have bright red eyes, and then as they continue feeding on people, it darkens to like a rose red. Vampires that only live off of animal blood, like the Cullens and the Denali Coven, have golden colored eyes. And regardless of the diet, any vampire, if they go too long without feeding, gets black eyes. Remember earlier how I mentioned that all of the fluid in the body, including the fluid in the eyes, is venom? That's why vampires don't just wear colored contacts to hide the fact that they're vampires, that they have blood red eyes, because over time, the plastic that makes up the contact would be dissolved by the venom. I think the eye color does play a bit into the terrifying nature of the vampires in Twilight. If I met someone with blood red eyes, I'd be a little scared, I'm not gonna lie. Eye color is maybe the least frightening thing about the vampires in Twilight, but discussion of eye color did give us one of the best scenes in cinematic history.
Your eyes were black the last time I saw you, and like golden brown.
Yeah, I know. It's the fluorescence.
Okay, so if you've seen Twilight, you know that the vampires don't have fangs, which honestly is kind of a letdown. I feel like fangs are one of the coolest things about vampires. If I was in the Twilight universe and got turned into a vampire and didn't have fangs, I'd be a little bummed, I'm not gonna lie. But their teeth are still terrifying without fangs. Although their teeth look like normal human teeth, they are flawless, unbreakable, and razor sharp. They can bite through any solid substance, including vampire skin, which, as I mentioned earlier, is marble hard. Their teeth are also venomous. Now, I've only covered the physical appearance of the vampires in Twilight. I haven't even gotten to the abilities that they have. The vampires in Twilight have super speed and strength, which is pretty common in vampire lore. I think the former a little more than the latter. So I'm not going to delve too deep into that. That's pretty standard vampire fare. The same goes for enhanced senses. So I'm not going to delve too deep into any of those things because they're pretty common in vampire media, but still terrifying. Those are still factors that are used to help hunt and kill their prey. The vampires in Twilight are also incredibly flexible. They have enhanced agility. This means that all vampires are essentially master gymnasts. Some vampires have additional skills that allow them to be even more effective killing machines. In the Cullen Coven, you have Edward, who can read minds, Alice, who can see the future, and Jasper, who can manipulate emotions. The main antagonist for at least 2 of the books and the deuter antagonist for 1 are the Volturi, and they're kind of like the vampire government, I guess, but they're comprised almost entirely of vampires with special abilities. 2 members of the Volturi that have their powers on display quite a lot throughout the series are Jane and Alec. Alec's power is essentially to cause sensory deprivation, and Jane's is to cause pain just by looking at someone. Also, the vampires in Twilight have a sixth sense, kind of like Spider-Man, but instead of using it to dodge attacks from the Green Goblin, they use it to murder and feed on people. Okay, remember earlier when I said to put a pin in the whole marble skin thing? We're coming back around to it. In Twilight, the vampires are virtually indestructible. As I said earlier, part of the transformation process hardens their skin. Their skin isn't just marble hard, it's diamond hard. Human weapons are useless against them. If you shot a vampire, the bullet would just bounce off of them. Vampires cannot kill themselves because the only thing that can kill a vampire is a werewolf or another vampire. That's why when Edward was depressed and wanted to die, he couldn't just kill himself. He had to go do a striptease in Italy so that other vampires would be forced to kill him. Okay, now we get to what is, in my opinion, the most terrifying thing about the physical aspect of the vampires in Twilight. It's something I have not come across in any other vampire media, and it's not really even depicted in the Twilight films. If a vampire rips off the limbs of another vampire, those limbs can be reattached using the vampire's venom. What? That's terrifying, right? But it gets worse. So the way that you have to kill a vampire in Twilight is to dismember it, completely tear the body apart. But then you have to burn all the body parts, because if you don't, the limbs will start to move on their own and try to reconnect to one another. What the hell? What spooky Mormon hell dream did Stephenie Meyer pull this from? I'm really bummed that the movies didn't ever really depict this, because I think it would have been something really cool and kind of terrifying to watch on the big screen, and I'm not gonna lie, I think it maybe would have given the films a little more street cred. So remember the other concept I said to put a pin in, the whole never age mentally thing? We've come back to that, unpin the idea. Vampires don't physically age. That's like Vampirology 101. But in Twilight, the vampires also don't mentally age. Edward Cullen was 17 when he became a vampire. That means that he will forever have the mentality of a 17-year-old. Sure, he's been alive since the Spanish flu was running rampant in the streets, and he has over 100 years of vampiric life, all of which he recalls in perfect detail, because that's something that the vampires in Twilight do. They recall every aspect of their vampire life in perfect detail. But he's forever 17, and that's one of the reasons that Bella is so adamant about being turned into a vampire sooner rather than later. She doesn't want to mentally outgrow her partner. She's 18 when she's turned into a vampire, and the age gap between 17 and 18 isn't really that big. Except Edward had only been 17 for a few months because his birthday's in June and he was turned into a vampire in September. Bella was born in September and turned 2 days before her 19th birthday. So really the age gap is more like 16 to 19. Now, think about the person you were and what your friends were like when you were 16 compared to the person you were and what your friends were like when you were 19. Some similarities, but also some differences. And those differences are only going to become more noticeable the further apart those numbers are. That's why Bella was so adamant about becoming a vampire sooner rather than later. She didn't want to emotionally or mentally outgrow Edward. If anything, I feel like this would be the worst aspect about being a vampire in Twilight, but I guess I can only say that because I can look at things in retrospect. I can look at who I was at 17 compared to who I am now at 20 and go, wow, 17-year-old Emily had so much growing to do. She had so much mental and emotional growth ahead of her. I don't hate the person I was at 17, but I like the person I am at 20 a lot more. But if I had never made it past 17, if I'd been turned into a vampire at that age, I guess it wouldn't be any different for me. I wouldn't be able to compare life at 17 to life at 20, so I guess it really wouldn't matter. This inability to age mentally is the reason that immortal children aren't allowed. First, let's look at one of my favorite vampires from any piece of media, Claudia from Interview with the Vampire. Claudia is a tragic figure, and I could probably do a whole video just about her, and maybe I will, but I feel like that would be a very self-indulgent video. In the film adaptation of Interview with the Vampire, which is one of my all-time favorite films, Claudia is played by Kirsten Dunst, who was about 10 when they filmed the movie, and I think that she's just phenomenal in it. She really holds her own against these much older and much more experienced actors. I think she does a great job in it. But anyways, in the film, Claudia is about 10 when she's turned. In the book, she's 4. I think that this age difference of 6 years actually makes Claudia's story in the book a lot more tragic than her one in the film, but both of them are just absolutely heart-wrenching to me. But basically my point with all of this is that even though Claudia was a child when she was turned into a vampire, she still ages mentally just like anyone else would. There's this great scene in the film where Claudia basically has this complete mental breakdown over the fact that she is forever unchanging.
Do you want me to be a doll forever?
Claudia, don't.
Why not? Can't I change like everybody else?
The movies changed the timelines around a little bit from the books. So in the movies, Claudia is essentially in her 30s, but she still looks like a little girl. She has the mind and mental capacity of an adult, but she looks like a child, and she always will. It's heartbreaking, and I think of all the characters in Interview with the Vampire, Claudia's is definitely the most tragic. In the Vampire Chronicles, immortal children aren't banned, they're just taboo, because it's cruel. It's cruel to subject someone to an eternity with the mind of an adult and the body of a child. In Twilight, immortal children are straight up illegal because they don't age mentally, because they are these beautiful children with no impulse control and extreme strength and extreme speed, and they are killing machines with the impulsivity and the mental capacity of a toddler. Think of any toddler you've ever met. Now, think of that toddler with not only the ability to kill you, but the desire to do so. Immortal children are banned because they put the rest of the vampire community at risk. They could potentially wipe out humanity because of a few temper tantrums and their lack of impulse control. So if after all the points I've given you, you still don't think that the vampires in Twilight are scary, then I don't know what to tell you, except that you're wrong, because they're terrifying. So in Twilight, the vampire government, the Volturi, live in Volterra, Italy. And in New Moon, Edward goes there to try and like get killed, and Alice and Bella take a last minute flight to save him. And it's this town with a clock tower, and there's a festival with all these red cloaks. Anyways, I didn't know until this year that Volterra is a real place. I thought that Stephenie Meyer just made it up for the books. Also, you know how in the first Twilight movie, there's like this blue tint over the entire film? That wasn't a filter. Washington is just like that.